When Jesus answered him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Rabboni, the blind man said to him, "I want to see." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has saved you." Immediately he could see and began to follow Jesus on the road.
This morning we're going to start a new series. And this series is a 4-week series. It's called I See You. And the idea is that God creates, He knows, He loves, and He sees all of us in our full humanity. But as people, we often fall into the habit of assuming that everyone is just like us, right? There's this temptation to kind of walk around and feel like everybody must just think like I do and feel the way I do. And while we do have humanity in common, that assumption can also at times be harmful and can prevent us from truly seeing people and really listening to their perspectives. So the series, this 4-week series, is kind of designed to help us to learn how to listen to folks, how to respect them, how to affirm them, and how to act for and with others, but to do so without compromising biblical truths. So that way we ourselves can also can know God more fully. So this series hopefully will help us to see better those in our circles of influence, to hear what their lives are really saying, to see them, to affirm them and build them up, but not necessarily adopt all that they are about that may or may not be about God. Does that make sense? So this morning we're going to explore this idea of hearing other voices. And it's easy, I think, for us to get preoccupied with our own lives, right? That you go to work, you got the radio going, you're making your shopping list in your head, and you got all these things you also have to do at work, and you just have all of this stuff going on. And it's so easy for us to get preoccupied with our own lives. And as Christians, we also sometimes get preoccupied with our own growth in Christ. I'm focused on, well, I need to learn this. I need to shape this part of my life and do better in this part of my life and in order to be a better Christian. Or as a church, sometimes we even get so preoccupied with our mission as a church. Well, our mission is to love God and to love others, and sometimes we miss the others when we're trying to love them. We get so preoccupied that sometimes we stop listening altogether. And yet as Christians, we can't fully engage in what God has called us to without taking the time to hear the voices that we encounter along the road. So by way of confession, I tend to spend a lot of time in my own head. And I have this visual of climbing up my neck and into my brain, which is this vast cave of nothingness. And I like to climb into my own brain and spend time there and being just kind of self-absorbed in my own thoughts. And it's honestly why I like to spend so much time alone in the woods. There's nothing there competing for my attention. And so I can just get lost in my own thoughts. And when something else comes in, as a man, multitasking is not a strong suit for me. So I get distracted real easily. And if you don't believe me, you can ask Jackie. She'll have an entire conversation with me while I am reading or watching TV or watching something on YouTube, and inevitably I'll ask her, "Did you say something?" And it kind of gets summed up. Anissa has a meme this morning, and this is kind of me summed up. My wife said, "Are you even listening to me?" And I said, "That's a weird way to start a conversation." That's me. We'll be sitting on the couch, and she's sitting right next to me, and I am just completely lost in something on my phone or in the television show. What's even worse sometimes is that she'll ask me to get something from the store, or would you take the dogs out, or can you get Rachel to school at this point in time, and I'll completely miss it. And my only defense with her is, "You never told me that." It's not a lie if you believe it. And she'll say, no, I know we had this conversation, and lots of times I can convince her that we didn't, because she thinks she's not all there. And she is all there. I'm the one that's not all there. But my conversations can be, much of my life can be summed up with that meme, that I just completely miss a lot of the things around me because I am so self-absorbed. Sometimes being too focused or preoccupied can also lead to missing opportunities to connect with people. So when our twins were born, when Jacob and Emily were born, we had tried to have kids for years, and then God gave us 2. What a gift. What a blessing that was. Well, when they were born, I was in the middle of running a large Young Life club. We had about 100 kids that would come to our house weekly. I was working for a church. Because I was on Young Life staff, I had to travel to the Adirondacks every other month. I was going out to Colorado 6 weeks a year to work on my master's degree. I was consumed with all of these things, all of which were great things. They were all things of God. They were all ministry related. But as the years rolled along and the twins got older, I began to look back on life. And Jackie would be like, oh, do you remember when Jake did this? I mean, no. Do you remember Emily's fuzzy hair? She had this hair that would just stand up straight, and she used to run around just in these rubber boots. I'd be like, I kind of remember the hair. I realized that I had very few memories of them as infants. One of the ones that I have 2. One was the night that we came home from the hospital and I dropped Emily on the floor. I fell asleep on the couch with her in my arm, and when I did, she went thump. The other one I have is of Jake sitting in my lap, and I'm reading a book, a systematics theology book, and I'm trying to highlight, and he kept grabbing the marker and writing in the book. And as a dad, that breaks your heart. Like, those are the memories I have of them as babies. I had missed opportunities to play with them, to love on them, and to help raise them. I was too busy with things that I thought were of God to hear the voices along the road, and now I see that I missed the opportunity to really connect with them. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who has missed opportunities to connect with others because I wasn't paying attention to their voices. Sometimes churches can get so focused on their plans that we ignore the people along the wayside as well. Especially those people who might be different from us in some way. And this can be true even when we have the best intentions of serving others. We see this in a lot in the mission field. So the first time I went to Senegal, I took 3 college kids with me. And we had this plan. We're going to go and we're going to, the cement seal on the outside of the church was crumbling. We were going to scrape that, and we were going to put a new coat on it and paint it. We had all these plans. We're going to beautify this church for them. And after about 3 hours in 100-degree heat, and the people of the community trying to pull us away from the wall, we realized that the people of Indidor, didn't want their church necessarily painted. They wanted to connect with us as people. We had great intentions of going and serving that community, but we were so focused on the plan. We got to get the plan together. We got to get this job done and done right, that we almost missed the opportunity of connecting with a group of people who have now become family to me. I almost missed it. Well, this morning, as we turn our attention to the Gospel of Mark in chapter 10, this passage that Andy read shares the story of Bartimaeus. And I wrestled with which story to share, because there are so many in Scripture where a voice is being heard and Jesus actually stops and hears it. But I think Bartimaeus will work. So we have this passage that Andy shared in Mark 10, 46 to 52, if you're following along. And we find Jesus, and he's on his way to Jerusalem. And as he's walking along, and he's got crowds with him and the disciples with him, Bartimaeus, which really is the son of Timaeus, he's a blind man. And he's begging on the street. And by virtue of being blind and having to beg, by virtue of his disability, Bartimaeus is an outsider in his community. He's not on the in crowd. He's kind of a cast out, or outcast. I guess it would have worked either way. But somehow, Bartimaeus knew who Jesus was. If you read, starting in 46, it says, "Then they came to Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, 'Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me.'" Somehow Bartimaeus knew who Jesus was. And didn't just know his name, but he knew that he was the Son of David. He correctly named Jesus. And in the process, he also demonstrated that he had a voice, and he knew how to use it, even though he was blind and poor. Now, we live in a culture where not everybody has a voice. Not everybody has a voice that gets heard either. There are people that get oppressed by society, and we don't really want to hear their voice. What we as followers of Christ need to realize is that all people have value. All people have worth. All people carry what they call the imago Dei, the image of God. Regardless of our differences, we all have that image in us. People on the margins in society and in culture are often able, though, to recognize the presence and the work of God and connect it in ways that we often are not able to. There is a blessing that can be missed when we don't listen to the voices in the margin. Just as Bartimaeus identified Jesus as the Son of David and called him into this miraculous moment, even though Jesus was on his way to face his own torturous death, Jesus stops and listens to Bartimaeus. It makes a connection with Bartimaeus as well. So the passage goes on, and we left off Bartimaeus saying, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Remember, he's an outsider. They pushed him even further to the margin. Many rebuked him. That word rebuke basically means to shut up in a direct translation. It means silent. Be silent. But what does Bartimaeus do? He shouts all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stops. Call him. Call him over here. I want to hear what this man has to say. So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, get on your feet. He's calling you." And Bartimaeus takes probably the one thing that was of value to him, his cloak, and he throws it off. And he jumps up to his feet, and he came to Jesus. And Jesus says, What do you want me to do for you? See, the people following Jesus are trying to quiet Bartimaeus because they were so focused on what they believed was the plan of the mission. We got to get Jesus to Jerusalem because in Jerusalem, he's going to turn things upside down. He's going to go into the temple and make things right. He's going to free the captives and free the oppressed. And meanwhile, they're running across an oppressed man right here, an outcast right here along the road. And they were completely missing that because they were so focused on the mission. But Jesus stopped. He took the time to listen. And Jesus didn't just use his ears to listen. He used his heart and the Holy Spirit. He opened himself to who Bartimaeus was and what Bartimaeus might need. And in this beautiful act of grace, Jesus didn't just presume to know what Bartimaeus needed. He asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" I think there's a lesson in that for us as well. It's a mistake for us to presume to know what someone who is different from us may need. It was a mistake for us to presume that that church in Senegal needed to be painted when really what they wanted was to be in fellowship with people, a new people. Jesus made room for Bartimaeus. He made room for him by asking, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus demonstrated that we have to make room in ourselves, in our hearts, in our churches, and in our communities in order to receive people. If you think about it, like imagine you're having dinner, a family dinner at home, and guests show up. Okay, slide down, kids, we're going to add another chair. Or if you go to John and Sarah's and you sit in one of their booths and somebody walks in, "Hey, can I have lunch with you?" "Sure." You slide down, you make room for them. We have to do that in our hearts as well. We make room for those people that maybe we haven't listened to before, or maybe those people that are on the margins. We scoot down. We shouldn't assume that we know what a person's needs are based solely on their worldview or their cultural perspective. I mentioned that with Senegal, also with our family. When we moved here, we came from the thriving metropolis of Rochester. Did you know that most of the churches in Rochester are not like Hope Chapel? They tend to have no pews and more chairs, all chairs. They tend to have big light deals and smoke machines and almost like concerts, and they don't have that same kind of family feel that we have. Now imagine if when we moved down here we said, "Okay, we're gonna bring Hope Chapel up to date, and we're gonna put everything online, and we're gonna get lights. Okay, these stained glass windows, they gotta go." You all would have ran us out of town on a rip, and thank God for that, because that to me doesn't speak of church either. I wasn't born in Perry, but I got here as soon as I could. We can't assume, based on worldviews and cultural perspectives, that we know what these folks need. It would have been wrong for us to assume, well, we need to bring Hope Chapel up to date. Well, we move forward, and Bartimaeus, as I said, threw off his cloak. And a cloak for a blind man is something of great importance, great value. It was his shelter, it was his warmth, and he throws it all off. And that says something about him. It says that he's willing to give up what was meaningful to him in order to go to Jesus. He was willing to give up something that was important to him in order to respond to Jesus' calling to him. And I think that begs a question for us as well. What are things that we value as individuals, but also as a church, maybe traditions or worship styles that we might have to give up in order to respond to Jesus' call in our lives in this moment? Are there things maybe that we cling to because they make us comfortable, but that might actually be impeding our call to faith? Now, I'll be honest, I don't think Hope Chapel has a lot of golden calves. I have seen Hope Chapel turn pretty quickly, much quicker than a lot of other churches have, in terms of, oh, COVID? Yeah, we'll do it online. And nobody complained. Or I remember Calvin saying one week there was an organ and the next week there wasn't. I have never heard that from anybody. There was never a complaint from anybody in the 5 years that I've been here. The only way I knew that story was from Calvin. I think Hope Chapel does a pretty good job at holding things loosely, traditions loosely. But it's always still a good question to ask. Are there things that we're holding on to that make us comfortable that maybe we need to let go of a little bit in order to respond to God's calling to us to go and to reach others? For us as individuals, our normal day gets bombarded with information. Information comes at us from all different directions nowadays. With phones and texts and emails and television, we get overloaded. And it's difficult, but it's even more important now for us to stop and learn to listen. Just as Jesus did. What do you want me to do for you? And he listened. Blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. There's another story in Mark where Jesus is walking along, and Jairus comes, the synagogue ruler, and says, hey, my daughter's dying. And Jesus says, okay, I'll go to your house. And in the meantime, a woman touches the tassels on his cloak, and power goes out, and she's healed from this hemorrhaging disease. And Mark says, and uses very specific wording, that the woman then, Jesus finds the woman, and the woman tells him the whole story. And it wasn't like, yeah, I was the one, I wasn't feeling well, and I touched your cloak, and now I'm healed. Okay, great. No, it was, the woman explained 12 years of suffering and pain and hurt. 12 years. That was not a short story. And meanwhile, Jairus' daughter is dying. But Jesus, in God's timing and in God's economy, listening is one of the most important things we can do. With all the information coming at us, we have to learn to stop and to really listen to the people around us. Listen and hear. When I began to realize how much of my kids' younger lives I missed, I began to learn how to stop and to really listen to what they're saying. I don't have it down yet, do I, Rach? But I'm learning. I'm trying. And people say things verbally, but often say a lot more with their body language. And I think we can hear even more when we approach listening with the ears of God. So here's how I've learned to do this. When I stop to listen and to hear maybe what somebody's trying to say, silently in my head, I just say this prayer. Lord, help me to hear with your ears, with your heart. Help me to hear not just this person's words, but what is truly on their hearts. And it takes practice. And sometimes it takes courage, because you ask some prompting questions. And as people speak, and as we learn to listen with God's ears, insights start coming that you're like, I have no idea where that came from. That has to be from God. Someone asking you maybe, hey, could you pray for me? And they ask you that same thing week after week. What they might really be saying is, can you just let me know that I'm of value? Oh, those are, it's so easy to just dismiss, oh my gosh, they're asking me to pray for their cousin's nephew's boyfriend's roommate again. And really what they're saying is, will you just hear me? Will you just let me know that I'm valuable? We have to learn to listen with God's heart. And when we do, we gain those types of insights. And then part of practice is learning to hear and respect those voices. Learning to respect the voices that we hear that we may not even agree with. We have to practice keeping our hearts open to where God is present and where He is already moving. So as a church community, not only should we ask if we're stopping to listen, but also what voices are we as a church not hearing, or are we resistant to hearing? How would our church be different if we listened to some of these other voices that we need to be paying attention to? How can we as a church be more intentional about hearing the voices on the road? And how would our church communities and ministries change if we incorporated some of these voices? In light of our encounter with Jesus, how is God calling us to make space for others? So here's an example. We don't live really in a culturally diverse community. But I think we have a responsibility still to listen to those voices that we come in contact with. Are we listening to the voices maybe of the migrant workers in our community? Can you tell me where they hurt? What do they need? How could they be served? What do they want? Are we listening to the voices in our community who are trying to survive on little to nothing? Are we listening to the single moms in our community? We have a huge, huge population in our community of single mothers. Are we listening to those who are maybe physically challenged? Do we know our black friends in the community? Do you know how difficult it is to find a church that as a black man or woman that I feel comfortable in? Not that I'm trying to it's difficult to find a church that they connect with in a rural community. Now, I'm not saying that we need to become a black church, but I think we need to listen to the voices so that we can, if they come in our door, slide down the pew and make room in our hearts and our lives. I'm not suggesting that we change the style of our worship or that we decide that we are going to now be for all of the things that we have so long said are wrong in culture. I am saying that we need to be faithful at least to hearing those voices and communicating that they are valuable. And I think we need to look at how we may incorporate what is at the heart of what they're saying. So I'm going to close with this. This week, as you're rushing around from one thing to another, I want to encourage you to take a Senegalese attitude. By virtue of being part of Hope Chapel, you are part of Podom, Senegal. You are all Senegalese people now. And we joke often when we go that, when we get off the plane and we take our shoes off and put our sandals on, everything slows down. You go through customs and you march through, you get into the airport parking lot and we put on the sandals and man, everything slows down. It drove Jackie nuts because Jackie is going 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time, and she'd be out in front of us as we're walking with the group. We slow down. We're Senegalese now. So this week, put on those sandals and slow down. Slow down the urgency to get to the next thing. And value being present with people over programs or over achievement. Be with the people that you are with. Judy, I can point you out since you do this well.
What?
She's scared. When you go into Bert's, if she's there and she's running a store, a huge hardware store, the only one in our community, she'll stop and talk to me for 10 minutes. She does that well. She wears her Senegalese sandals and her...
We're usually complaining about
Another example for me was last Friday. I was up and ready to head to the woods at 8 a.m. I have a bunch of wood. I was on a mission. I'm going to cut up this firewood. I want to get it cut and split so I can give it to somebody in the community that I'm trying to serve. And before getting started, I knew I needed to go up and see Norm. He does the chain sharpening. And I needed to pick up some chains from him and drop off some others. And if you know Norm, or if you know the Mennonites in general, you know it's difficult to get in and get out. It is not a quick process usually. So Norm and I got talking, and we talked about chains and this new cut that he's doing on chains. And we talked about his wife's baking and farm fresh eggs and what flour is the best to use when you're baking. And we walked his gardens, and we talked about tomatoes and pulling suckers, and we talked about vegetables, and we talked about fertilizer. I had gotten to Norm's place at 9 a.m., and it was after 10 when I left. So then I needed to go to North Country Ag out on 28, and the owner there, Michael, is also a Mennonite. Mennonite? Yeah, I think so. And he and I got talking about farm prices and saws and nuts and bolts stuff and the construction on 20A and how best to cook geese. As a result of these two conversations, I didn't cut a single log until noon. I was up and ready to be in the woods by 8. I didn't cut a tree until noon. I was frustrated and feeling like my day off just got wasted and my to-do list is only getting longer. And in my hurry to serve someone else by cutting firewood, I had missed the opportunity to really hear Norm and Michael's hearts. What were they really communicating? It wasn't just small talk. They were communicating both a value for life and for the things that God had created. And I was missing that opportunity. So this week, the homework is this: slow down and really listen. And then I want you to think of 1 or 2 ways that you as an individual, and maybe we as a church, can become more aware of the voices on the side of the road and how we might be able to create space for them in our community. Let's pray. Lord, so often you speak to us through others, or you speak to us in the still silent voices in our hearts. Father, I confess too often I miss what you are saying. I miss what you're saying to me. I miss what you're saying to me through others. Lord, may we build space into our week to really hear the voices that we encounter along the road. Amen.
Would you stand as we sing together?
Go before, lift me up.
the mission prayer meeting will be meeting downstairs, and the deacon meeting will be meeting up front. If you're interested in finding out more about deacons, or you want to join us praying for missions, don't miss those two opportunities. One of the scriptures that I was going to use today was one of my favorites, and it's from Acts 8. And it says, the Spirit told Philip, go to the chariot and stand near it. Then Philip ran to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. Do you understand what you're reading? Philip asked. And the man responded, how can I, he said, unless someone explains it to me. Philip was present and was listening and asked a good question. And he didn't miss an opportunity to connect with somebody along the road. Go this week. Be a people that are mindful of the voices on the road and listen with God's ears and God's heart. Go in peace. Amen.